all what I want to say is that if you'll speak in clear, loud voice, with clear facts, and if you'll encourage on every campus young Jewish students to speak in a clear voice with these facts, situation can be changed very quickly. Because young Jews, and we can see it again and again, want to be connected, want to be inspired, don't want to be ashamed. And they are our main force, our main weapon in this struggle. Thank you.
You want to start walking? You want to start walking? Thank you. Thank you, Natan, and thank God for the Jewish people that you no longer need to travel with a lawyer on your left and a lawyer on your right.
I only started.
With that, taking parliamentary privilege of speaking from the podium, Erwin Kotler. Erwin?
I don't have the combination of intellect and adrenaline that my colleagues have when they're sitting, so I have to try and do it when I'm standing. I just want to begin by saying Alan made a very compelling point, that an assault on the legitimacy of Israel is an assault on the legitimacy of America. I just want to say that recently at the Interparliamentary Conference to Combat Anti-Semitism held in Ottawa, November 2009, both the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition in Canada said those very words, that an assault on the legitimacy of Israel is an assault on the legitimacy of Canada and Canadian values. There are two basic theses that underline my remarks today. The first is that if delegitimization is the underlying theme of bringing us together today, I want to say that delegitimization is not a new phenomenon. Indeed, it has been with us since the establishment of the State of Israel, where Israel was referred to in a direct assault on its legitimacy at the time as being an original sin in 1948 at its creation. And then in the run-up to the 1967 war, we may forget the Arabic refrain at the time that Israel was a congenital act of aggression, thereby legitimating, as it were, an Arab assault on Israel. And we had in 1975, of course, the infamous Zionism is racism resolution. So that's the first thing. Delegitimization is not a new phenomenon. The second is, if war, as Clausewitz put it, is a continuation of politics by other means, then lawfare is the waging of war, the waging of the war of delegitimization under the cover of law. Alan set forth a brilliant case for the legitimacy of Israel, why Israel itself operates under the cover of law. Therefore, lawfare has emerged as a kind of linchpin of the delegitimization, in effect, of the laundering of delegitimization under the cover of law. And that's my basic point here today, is that the threat is not so much that of delegitimization as it was in its direct assaults. The threat today is the laundering of that delegitimization under the cover of law, or under the cover of all the values that represent the best of America and Canada, the international community, and the like. In other words, delegitimization under the cover of law, of human rights, and the like. As it happens, we meet today at an important converging moment of remembrance and reminder. It's the immediate the 35th anniversary, the aftermath of the 35th anniversary of the Zionism as racism resolution that I mentioned. The first international juridical expression of both delegitimization and lawfare in the international arena, which the late Senator Daniel Moynihan put it best when he said that that resolution gave the abomination of anti-Semitism the appearance of international legal sanction. But at the same time, we had at that time in 1975, if we remember, the birth of the international human rights revolution, the Helsinki Final Act, which Natan was a founder of the Helsinki process, which became an organizing idiom for the launching of the international human rights revolution, let alone the International Bill of Rights and the like. And what we had, therefore, 35 years ago and now, was a convergence of both the international human rights revolution and the lawfare and delegitimization revolution. And so it was then, at the same time that we had the Zionism as racism resolution, proceeding under the radar screen was the delegitimization of Israel under the rule of law, using all the rubrics of international law, human rights, and the like as the agents of that delegitimization. And so it was then, even before the Zionism is racism resolution, but we weren't paying attention to it, that Israel was held to be the enemy of trade unionism. Evidence, the resolution of the ILO condemning alleged Israeli suppression of trade unionism. The enemy of health. Evidence, the resolution of the World Health Organization condemning alleged Israeli poisoning of Palestinians on the West Bank. The enemy of culture. Evidence, the resolution of UNESCO condemning alleged Israeli desecration of historic sites in Jerusalem and the West Bank. The enemy of women. Evidence, the resolution of the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women condemning Israeli oppression of Palestinian women. The enemy of peace. Evidence, the resolution of the United Nations General Assembly and elsewhere condemning Israel as an enemy of peace. And always, everywhere, Israel as the enemy of human rights. The spate of resolutions condemning Israel as a human rights violator. As I wrote at the time, that in a world in which human rights has emerged as the new secular religion of our time, the portrayal of Israel as the meta-human rights violator of our time was a portrayal of Israel as the new Antichrist of our time. And that was 35 years ago, 1975. And so the question becomes, what is it that has changed? What I want to suggest is that there's been a cluster of dynamics that we need to appreciate that has morphed into a critical mass of delegitimization. The first is the globalization phenomenon. The globalization of media and markets and technology and the new media and the like, but the globalization of delegitimization in terms of globalization of rights, of law, of NGOs and the like. Second has been the reconfiguration of the Arab-Israeli conflict, where in the Arab-Israeli conflict, Israel was the most disadvantaged political minority in the world, but reconfiguring it as the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. As my colleague Justice Walter Tarnopolsky put it again 35 years ago, that so long as the Arabs deny Israel's right to exist, the Arabs have no case and no standing to make the case. But if Israel appears to be denying the Palestinian right to self-determination, then Israel will appear to have no case and no standing to make the case. That's the reconfiguration of the conflict as part of the delegitimization phenomenon. The third is the reframing of the Arab-Israeli conflict, not only as an Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but the Palestinization of human rights, of reframing it as a human rights conflict with Israel as a meta-human rights violator. Then there's the mainstreaming of delegitimization amongst the elites, recalling the words of Ernst Benda in the late 30s, la trahison d'éclair, the betrayal of the intellectuals, the betrayal of the elites, which include the politicization of academe, where boycotts, divestment, sanctions have become metaphor of this politicization, and the Palestinization of the campus culture, where Palestinian human rights has become the poster boy for human rights on the campus culture, when the human rights and the campuses merge into one. The sixth has been the advent of the human rights culture, the NGO revolution, and all that attends it, and the laundering of delegitimization in that regard. And finally, we had the ending of the Cold War. You see, while all this delegitimization was proceeding against Israel in the manner in which I've been describing, the Jews in North America and beyond, and rightly so, were invoking that human rights revolution of which I spoke. We're invoking the Helsinki Final Act as part of the struggle for Soviet Jewry. So we had two dynamics proceeding forward. The struggle for Soviet Jewry, in which we were all engaged, and proceeding under the radar screen, the delegitimization of Israel that we were ignoring at our peril, and where the critical mass of that delegitimization has now come forth, and now this has become a cottage industry of discussion, but really it was launched, as I said, some 35 years ago. Let me just share with you, in terms of knowing how to address and redress this delegitimization phenomenon, very quickly, because you know wherever I speak, 5 basic case studies or illustration of this delegitimization, all of which are also constituents of warfare. The first is the delegitimization of Israel under the protective cover of the United Nations. It's not only the question of the Zionism as racism resolution or the critical mass that I mentioned to you that was preceding then. We have to appreciate that every day of every year, somewhere, there's a United Nations conference, a United Nations agency, a United Nations decision, etc., engaged in the delegitimization of Israel. And whatever you want to think about the United Nations, as a Canadian, this is part of my DNA, so we tend to take it seriously. And multilateralism, particularly now, is returning to the fore in terms of international diplomacy and the like, which brings the UN to the fore, UN Security Council resolution, resettlements, and so on. The main point I want to make here is not only delegitimization under the protective cover of the UN, but the exposure to that delegitimization by a mass of publics. Every time these UN meetings are taking place, and I've attended them as part of a Canadian delegation, what you have at the same time are parliamentarians, our diplomats, our civil servants, our professors, our students, our media, and the like. They are all regularly exposed to this critical mass of delegitimization, and they internalize it. And let's not ignore that every United Nations resolution reads as a kind of legal judgment, a finding of fact and conclusion of law. It's not accidental that we are on the eve of a possible UN Security Council resolution on the illegality of the Israeli settlements. Because those who propose such resolutions and those who will be exposed to it know very well that America is a legal culture. This is a due process society. If you say that Israel is doing something that's illegal, it's much worse than saying that it's doing something that is stupid or wrong or ill-advised. And so if you can create a critical mass of delegitimization, of which this UN Security Council is the latest case study, then what you basically do is say that this is an illegal society, an illegal culture, and the like. Which brings me now to the second phenomenon of delegitimization, and that's delegitimization under the cover of international law. Not just international law, generally speaking, but international human rights law, international humanitarian law, international criminal law, which purports, in effect, to criminalize the state of Israel, to criminalize its right of self-defense. What is the application of the principle of universal jurisdiction all about? It's not that the principle is wrong. Israel invoked the principle of universal jurisdiction to prosecute Adolf Eichmann. What is at this point abusive and prejudicial in the application of the principle of universal jurisdiction is the selective and prejudicial application of that principle, singling out Israeli nationals for prosecution, if not persecution, having a chilling effect on Israeli leaders being able to travel and the like. And it's not only on the criminal side. There are increasing civil suits that are being used under the principle of universal jurisdiction as part of the boycott, divestment, sanctions campaign. You have also the use of the International Court of Justice. It's not only with respect to outlawing the security barrier. Now there's talk about references to the International Court of Justice on the illegality of the settlements, on the convening of the contracting parties to the Genocide Convention, which have only been convened once in their history, not because of Rwanda, not because of the genocide in the Balkans, not because of anything in Darfur, but only once, with respect to singling out Israel as being a meta-violator of the Geneva Convention, and talk again now of reconvening the contracting parties to the Genocide Convention. And I can go on in terms of the plethora of commissions of inquiry, fact-finding commissions, and the like, which leads me to the third, the delegitimization of Israel under the culture of human rights. If human rights has emerged as a new secular religion of our time, if the United Nations Council on Human Rights is the agent, the instrumentality for the promotion and protection of human rights, what better agency is there to engage in delegitimization? We have to understand that the Goldstone Commission was a creature of this United Nations Council on Human Rights, which has a plethora of resolutions which seek to reaffirm Israel not only as a meta-human rights violator, but in fact you attack the culture of impunity by putting Israel in the docket. And what you do is allegedly bringing redress for its victims, all under the culture of human rights. The fourth